Hello everyone, bringing you a video today talking about this set of web equipment, and this video will be part one of two. The second part will involve looking at the various components we have on the mannequin here in more detail. In this video we're going to have a look at them all set up as a set of equipment as we have them here on the mannequin. This is quite an unusual set of equipment. It's an interwar commercial offering from the Mills Equipment Company. It was produced in 1927, all the components are dated 1927. And it's based heavily on the 1925 pattern web equipment, which some people may be familiar with. That's commonly associated with service with the RAF. The RAF procured 1925 pattern in a blue-grey finish as opposed to khaki as we have here, although khaki sets of the 1925 pattern equipment were produced and were used elsewhere by British Empire forces. There's an interesting section on that on Khaki Web, a fantastic website if you're interested in web equipment, and obviously there's a link to that page down below. This equipment is also mentioned on there, although it's unclear whether you'd really consider this 1925 pattern because it has some additional components, which we'll talk about in a minute. So the Mills Equipment Company essentially took existing sets of web equipment and took various components from them to make this set of equipment to fit the needs of the specific customer. And it appears that the customer was Afghanistan, the Royal Afghan Army at the time. These sets of equipment that have been recovered have all come out of Afghanistan. All of those that have appeared on the market have come from Afghanistan. This particular set is a very generous gift from my friend Ian Parker. He picked this up during his service in Afghanistan and has sent it on to me, and it's incredibly generous of him to do so. It's a very interesting set of equipment to have in the collection. It's not British Empire issue, however it is derived from the designs that were in use by some elements of British Empire and British forces at the time, and it's an interesting commercial offering from the Mills Equipment Company. So we'll talk about the various components and so forth that we have on the mannequin here. In part two, we'll be looking at all of this in more detail as well. Starting at the front, we have the braces supporting the cartridge carriers here, as you can see. These are a fairly standard component of Mills Equipment Company webbing sets at the time, and we have the cartridge carriers at the front here. This is basically all standard 1925 pattern fare in khaki, as you can see. The braces support the cartridge carriers with these buckles at the top here. They pass through the buckles here to support some of the weight of the cartridge carriers at the front, and you have a loop in the top of each of the buckles there which would allow the shoulder straps for a rucksack or a haversack carried on the back to be clipped in, similar to 1937 pattern for those who are familiar with that set of web equipment. The cartridge carriers form the front of the belt. You can see here that the buckle is attached to the cartridge carriers. This essentially works in a similar manner to a three-part belt. There's a rear section onto which the cartridge carriers clip, and that allows you to adjust the size, and then the cartridge carriers basically themselves form the front of the belt with an elongated version of the Mills hook and loop buckle in the middle there, as you can see. 4 pockets on each side, and in this instance these are loaded with 3 5-round charges of .303 ammunition to illustrate the carrying capacity of this set of equipment. Another thing to mention here while we're looking at the front of the mannequin, this is of course displayed with British service dress. That's simply to set the equipment off on the mannequin. This is not British issue equipment. However, this is in line with many of the photographs you'll see from the Mills Equipment Company at the time, where equipment which wasn't actually adopted by the British Army is modelled by British soldiers in the photographs of the time. So it's sort of in line with that historically, I suppose you could say. We'll move on to look at the right hand side of the equipment now, and I'll just lift the arm out of the way so we can see what's going on here. First of all, you have the rear pocket, the cartridge carriers here, loops right round onto the hip as you can see there. And you can hopefully see here as well where the cartridge carrier clips onto the rear section of the belt just round here. And that basically means you have a belt formed round the waist. The front section's formed by the cartridge carriers themselves, and then this back piece, which has the buckles for the braces on it as well. We'll see that in just a minute. Beneath the belt here, carried on the brace ends, we have both the water bottle in its carrier and the 2-part entrenching tool in its carrier. Now, this is not part of the 1925 pattern design. The 1925 pattern design did not include provision to carry the 2-part entrenching tool. So for this set of equipment, the Mills Equipment Company looked back to an earlier set of equipment, the 1919 pattern. Now, the 1919 pattern is probably best known as the pistol equipment used by the Royal Navy. However, there was also a rifle version of the equipment, and this carrier for the entrenching tool and the water bottle is taken from that design to add on to this set of equipment to basically make a new pattern of equipment, I guess you could say. This is not part of the 1925 pattern, which is what differentiates these sets. You have a water bottle in a skeleton carrier here, very similar to 1937 pattern. even to the point that it closes with a press stud up on the shoulder of the bottle here, rather than on the front of the carrier. And it buckles onto this carrier for the two-part entrenching tool here. You'll see the straps and the various fittings for doing that when we look at this in more detail in part 2. The carrier for the entrenching tool has a webbing piece here, a webbing envelope into which the head of the two-part entrenching tool slots, and then loops on the side here to carry the helve for the two-part entrenching tool. That, of course, is quite similar to the way this was carried with the 1908 pattern equipment. It does mean you have quite a heavy load hanging below the belt and swinging around, but that's fairly typical for web equipment of this time. It's an accepted part of the design, I guess you could say, at this time period. Looking at the back of the equipment here, we don't have a load carried on the back, so you can see the braces, how they cross over here, and they have a loop where they cross over. We'll see that in more detail in part 2, of course. And this is fairly standard for Mills Equipment Company sets of equipment. You see this with the 1919 pattern equipment, the 1925 pattern, and then the 1937 pattern. The design of braces is basically the same for each set of equipment. You can see the back section of the belt here with the buckles where the braces attach, and on the brace ends, of course, we have a load carried on each hip there. It is likely that this set of equipment had provision to carry a load on the back, probably using the 1925 pattern rucksack. Now, the set of equipment on khaki web, there is a set of these components displayed on khaki web, and they include the upper section of a 1925 pattern rucksack, or what is essentially a 1925 pattern rucksack in khaki, dated and stamped in the same way as all the other components. It's likely that would have included the lower half as well, although it isn't present on that set of equipment. So it certainly can be speculated that the upper and lower rucksacks from the 1925 pattern equipment were included with these sets when they were initially ordered and sent out to Afghanistan. So I do hope you found it interesting looking at this. As I say, these sets of web equipment are quite unusual. There are a few floating around that have been recovered from Afghanistan, but not all that many. And it's a very nice addition to the collection. So a big thank you once again to Ian Parker for sending this over to me. It's extremely generous, and it's been great having opportunity to set this up on the mannequin and talk about it. As I say, in part 2, we'll look at all of these bits in more detail. If you'd like to see that video and future uploads going forward, please do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the notification button down below. That will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you would like to support the channel, you can. Both Patreon and PayPal are linked down below. And as ever, a massive thank you to everybody who supports the channel using those two methods. It's greatly appreciated, as I always say. Just to note here as well, I've started uploading videos directly to Patreon so that patrons over there can watch them ad-free. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, you can. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are all linked down below. And if you'd like to get in touch but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address down below as well. That's everything for this video, so until next time, bye for now.